Hello, everyone. So a lot of you wrote in and asked for my opinion on what's going on in Gaza. And as you all well know, that yesterday the United States conducted an airdrop in Gaza and dropped about 38,000 MREs for the people there. Now, there's 2 million people in Gaza that are suffering, and they haven't gotten any resupplies for months. Now, from my research, there's hundreds of trucks that are lined up on the Egyptian side of the border waiting to go into Gaza. And unfortunately, Israel's not allowing it. So this has caused a human catastrophe in Gaza where these people are literally suffering. And consequently, the United States now that has supported Israel unconditionally from the get-go by providing them unlimited weapons, 45,000 bombs by some estimates. There have been massive protests across the globe to free Palestine, and there have been some protests, counter-protests in support of Israel as well. But here's the bottom line. The bottom line is this: this whole thing was mishandled from the beginning, and so let me just talk about that for a moment. So right before an operation starts, the first thing you got to understand is as soon as you start dropping bombs and there's a civilian population involved, the civilians are going to move. Nobody's going to stand there and endure that. So you have to plan first and foremost for the civilian population, the displaced personnel, the refugees, and what do you do with them? That's the first thing. And we didn't learn this obviously in Afghanistan because I was there at the outset of the Afghan war. The same thing happened. All of a sudden, we started bombing in Afghanistan, and the civilians started moving towards Pakistan. And en route, people were desperate. It was winter time, so we had to drop, humanitarian meals. We had to drop, blankets and whatnot. And pretty soon, within a week or 10 days, we started seeing. One day, I was walking through the market, and I started seeing these MRE type humanitarian meals in the market for sale. $3, the guy said. $3. So I went back and I researched it, and at the time it was costing us about $16 to drop that meal into Afghanistan to the refugees. So I started thinking, having a business background, I'm thinking, why are we spending $16 for this meal when we can buy it from the market at $3 and drop it again? And they'll turn around and sell it for $3. So it's essentially, that's what's going to happen. So it's a huge waste. So I researched the 38,000 meals that were dropped in Gaza, and it turns out they're approximately about $12 a meal. So then I went back and researched what does the UN give an average Palestinian for food a month? How much money? What's their allowance? And it turns out it's about $30 per person they get. So for $30, they can live essentially, get their flour, their lentils, their sugar, their oil, and live quite well for $30, right? That's less than a day's worth of MREs. 3 MREs would be $36. So it's cost prohibitive, the path that we've taken. That's the first part. The second part of this is, they don't need MREs. And I learned that lesson again in Afghanistan. When I was a battalion commander, I had a militia force of about 200 to 400 some odd people based on the operation, and so we had this big long operation planned out, and we had these logistic trucks behind us packed with MREs to resupply about 1,000 Marines and 400 Afghan militia group for long duration, a couple of weeks. And it's a huge footprint. So the first night we stop, next morning I wake up and there's freaking MRE trash all over the place, and I'm pissed. I'm pissed because initially I thought it was the Marines. They'd lost their discipline. The Marines said, "Hey, sir, it's not us. It's those Afghan militia guys." So I go see the Afghan militia commander, and he tells me, he goes, "Listen, can I talk to you for a minute?" I said, "Absolutely, but you're going to clean up all that freaking mess." So he said, "Here, when you eat our food, you get sick. When we eat your food, we get sick. We don't want to eat your stuff. My people tried it. They didn't like it." So I said, "Well, so what do we do?" So he said, "I'll tell you what. Just give me $1 per person, and I'll take care of it. Don't worry about my people." So I said, "Easy, no problem." So it was about $400 a day I'd give them, and they'd buy sheep or goats locally and make their bread, and they ate quite healthy. And the few times they invited us over to share meals with them, I'll tell you what, they were living large. We loved it. My point is, rather than dropping MREs out of airplanes that are costing us a fortune, why not give them what their dietary requirements are? Flour, lentils, sugar, oil, tea. That's it. That's what they want. So that'd probably be smarter. We made a big thing in the news media that, hey, we're not dropping any pork. Well, that's great. I appreciate the fact that we understand they don't eat pork, not Jews or Muslims, and many of the Christians in the Middle East don't eat it either. Although we thought about it, but we're not thinking far enough. So the first thing you got to do is, in my opinion, where we failed miserably after 7 October, and trust me, 7 October is bad news, no good. What happened? But our response is exactly what Hamas wanted us to do. Exactly. We played into their hands, and I'll tell you why. Because an insurgency or a terrorist group hides amongst the population. That's where they're safe. That's where they get their strength from. And what did? We started bombing the shit out of Gaza, and they mingled in with the population. What should have we done? Well, what we should have done was probably remove the population away from Hamas so they didn't have any place to hide amongst them, and then gone after Hamas through special operations forces. But in a rush to get revenge, we screwed it up big time and created a huge mess. Now, granted, there was initially they said, well, North Gazans have to move towards the south, and all this cross movement of refugees, and it just cluttered the battle space. And I think what the Israeli government was trying to do, in their plan was to move these people south and then eventually force Egypt to take them over. The Palestinians aren't going anywhere. They've already endured it for 150 days, all the bombardment and famine and everything else. They're not going anywhere. If we had said, hey, we'll put you in the Negev desert and build camps there until we can clean out Hamas, that would probably make a lot more sense now, wouldn't it have? But, in trying to be, Machiavellian about this and moving them all the way to the south backfired big time. And the United States got caught in this game that Israel was playing. So that's the first part. So always have a plan before you start a war. Or what are you going to do with the civilian population? How are you going to take care of it? Because you have a moral obligation, under the Geneva Conventions and the law of war. You have an obligation to take care of civilians. This isn't, I hear a lot of this, well, in Dresden and Berlin and whatnot, we bombed the hell out of civilians. Well, you know what? The Geneva Conventions were amended as a result of that. So you can't go around doing that anymore. Okay, so the problem is now, Ramadan is coming up. It's going to be here in another week or so. And if we don't find a solution to this, the United States is going to be in a strategic mess. Globally, our reputation has gone down. People think that, that our unconditional support for Israel led to this catastrophe of, over 30,000 killed, over 12,000 children, 17,000 orphans. I mean, this is mind-boggling numbers. And I don't care which side of the equation you're on. Killing children is just immoral and wrong. As a battalion commander in combat, a few times we had civilians got caught in the crossfire, and the first thing I did was cease fire, check fire. And the reason for that was because morally, we can't go around killing civilians. I don't give a shit if it's collateral damage or not. A lot of generals sit up there, oh, it's a collateral damage and I feel real bad about it. Bullshit. You're wrong. There's no excuse to kill civilians. Bottom line. You don't plan that into your operation that, hey, we're going to take X number of civilian casualties. You just don't do it. It's immoral. And speaking of morality, all these big generals all sitting over there that are making these plans, you got to have the moral courage to stand up and say this is wrong. And nobody did it in Vietnam. Nobody did it in Afghanistan. Nobody did it in Iraq. Not a single general stood up and said this is wrong, except for General Shushinsky. He did. And General Newbold, Marine General, he did. That's what generals get paid to do. So you got to get the moral equation of war correct. Going to war in Iraq was immoral. It was illegal. We didn't have the moral equation right. And until we get that right, you're never going to win. Vietnam proved that. And Gaza is certainly going to prove it also. These people have endured 150 days of bombardment. I have seen 2,000-pound bombs getting dropped, in close proximity. And I'll tell you what, it ain't a good feeling. I can't imagine 150 days of that shit. It would probably, your brain gets dislodged. But these are, their will is strong. And morally, we need to figure it out. So before Ramadan comes, we need to impose a ceasefire. And I don't care what Hamas or Netanyahu and his cronies say. The world needs to impose a ceasefire. The United States needs to impose a ceasefire. We have vetoed 3 UN resolutions. Think about this. Morally, that's wrong. We want a ceasefire. Now, Houthis actually are fighting for a ceasefire, and we're fighting Houthis. It's all backwards. It doesn't make sense to me. The United States has a constitution, and the constitution is very clear in our values. What are those values? Very simply put, equality, freedom, and human rights. And that's what we ought to be fighting for all the time. That's who we are. But allowing some country to just bombard the shit out of 2 million people is wrong. It's crazy. It's immoral. It's abhorrent. And we're better than this. So before Ramadan comes up, we need to impose a ceasefire. That's it. It doesn't matter what the both sides think. You're getting a ceasefire. And put UN troops on the ground and stop the madness. That's one. Number 2 is we got to figure out how the Palestinians get their statehood. Israel shouldn't have any say in it. None. Just like the Palestinians didn't have a say in it when Israel became a state. So why does Israel has a say in it when the Palestinians need a state? The world has decided. And pretty soon, it won't be a 2-state solution. It may end up being a 1-state solution. And guess what? The Palestinians outnumber the people of the Jewish faith. And then, 10 years from now, you're going to have a Palestinian prime minister in Israel. Probably. It's happened before. And lastly is this issue of settlers, settlements. You got ministers like Interior Minister or Minister of Security of Israel, Ben-Gvir is a puppeteer. He's telling the settlers to do this, and they've gone to the border with Egypt, and they're not allowing humanitarian trucks in. These settlers are terrorists. They're just as bad as Hamas is. They're killing innocent Palestinians in the West Bank. They're stopping humanitarian aid from coming into Gaza. And they should be treated as terrorists. That's what we need to do. But guess what? It's U.S. money that's supporting these terrorists. We're allowing donations to go to these settlers, and these donations are tax deductible. Think about that. So every time somebody sends $1,000 to these settlers, they take it out of their taxes, and that impacts our tax revenue. So we're essentially funding it. Unacceptable. And then Israel continues on to build these settlements. Unacceptable. Okay? We need to impose a peace. It's that simple. Then the United States will be on the right side of this equation. And we'll run out of time. Killing children is unacceptable in any form. We just don't do it. Especially Americans. Not allowed. I don't care for what ideology, and I don't care for what purpose. They are innocent children. We don't do it. That's all I got. Stay rugged. Khan out.